Hello Internet and welcome to Historical Headlines for the 17th of December. General Ulysses S. Grant hates the Jews. Or, well, that is what one was to assume based upon his General Order number 11, published on this day in 1862, which expelled Jews as a class from the Union armies of the West, at which at that point he had command over. It basically told that all speculators, traders, and Jews were to be expelled from any area controlled by the Union army and removed away from the front line and sent to the back. As you can imagine, this was not entirely popular in the Jewish community and was in fact heavily criticized by the rest of the Union, which I am sure you will now be informed about by our time-traveling correspondent, Tim Sateson. Yes, thank you, Studio. It seems that what has provoked this particular general order seems to be that one of the ways the North is actually financing the war is, of course, through speculation with cotton smuggled through the southern lines and into the hand of northern merchants and speculators. Grant has long been an opponent of this way of doing things since, while it's probably given the northern industry some raw material that is needed, he also argues that it introduces direct money into the southern war effort, so he feels that the speculators and merchants that haunts his army camps are actually trying desperately to give advantages and money to the men who are trying to kill them and tearing the country apart. However, his mention of Jews as a class in his general order has obviously hit a line of anti-Semitism that has ripped across the North, causing outrage and condemnation across the entire North. The order has been called deplorable, a return to medieval norms regarding the relationships between religions and peoples, and has called on the president himself to revoke this order, to call upon Grant to revoke this order, and to proclaim that the Jews cannot be guilty to such a degree as Grant has permitted in this order. So far, Grant has stood strong against it, explaining to the Assistant Secretary of War that he feels like innumerous amount of speculators have breached every rule regarding trade that has been put in place, and that he feels that the Jews have been the primary movers of this situation. However, on this particular moment, I hear, yes, I hear, oh, here comes a messenger. Sir, messenger. What is in that order you're carrying to General Grant's tent?
This is an order from General-in-Chief Henry Halleck on behalf of President Lincoln, telling General Grant that insofar as he have actually ordered all Jews expelled from his department, he must immediately revoke such an order. The President has been moved by the outrage committed against an entire class of people that has been, for so long, honest and valued and complete citizens of the United States of America. But if you will excuse me, I must go to General Grant right now.
Well, there you have it. It seems that Grant had committed a terrible overreach with this general order, and one that has been immediately revoked by the president and by the higher-ranking commanders of the Union Army. One wonders what could have brought a man so known for justice and fairness to issue such a wide-sweeping and discriminatory order, and one can only hope that this does not in fact damage the Union war effort or damage Grant's personal standing with the American Jewish Society insofar as he wants to have any kind of future in public office after the war is over. Back to the studio. Thank you to a suspiciously naked Tim Sateson there. However, it is true. Grant did publish this very discriminatory and honestly anti-Semitic order. There are various reasons people would assume he did. Some people have assumed that he was simply heavily anti-Semitic, which was, after all, the style of the time, but later actions probably speak against that. There are probably three main reasons for his actions at this moment. First of all, this was almost the nadir of the Union war effort. Grant was was almost literally at this point the only light in a very, very dark place the Federals had moved into, with the Confederates making gains at every stage. And as he was himself frustrated in a almost 9-month-long attempt to approach and finally then take Vicksburg on the Mississippi from the Confederacy, a process that would take, in fact, almost another 6 months, it can be appreciated that Grant was perhaps not at his most, shall we say, emotionally accepting period, especially since this was also the time where the rumors were at its height that he was in fact a useless alcoholic drunk, and he was also dealing with some political machinations of one of his subordinate generals, McClernand, to get the primary Vicksburg campaign out of the hands of Grant and into McClernand's. A second reason was that Grant actually really did believe that probably the Jews were responsible for a lot of trading, illegal trading in southern cotton that let money and other resources flowing directly into the hands of the Confederates, who were killing his soldiers every single day. And of course he lashed out against that, where he probably should have simply either stood by or at least thought very heavily about what it was he was actually saying. Thirdly, and definitely connected to the second, there was his father. Grant had always been at odds with his father, who was a grasping and industrious man, let's put it mildly, but Jesse Root Grant was also a man who would never let a chance slip by in order to gain some advantage, and he had sent many attempts down to the lines in order to try to profit off his son's raised profile as the general in command of the Western theater of the war, and Grant absolutely resented that, beyond the fact that they had actually had a very strained personal relationship for almost 20 years at this point. Since the latest attempt from Jesse to profit from the war and Grant's army had involved some of Jesse's Jewish friends, I can see how all three things together would have led Grant to let go of his immediate reason and release such a general order. Of course, there is always the chance that he was in fact just a standard anti-Semite of his age. However, his later presidency speaks completely against that. Of course, it may be simply that the hail of criticism he got over this and the amount of Jews that came down to talk specifically to him to tell them how much they did not appreciate what he was doing put him in a better mood. In so case, this was a matter of a bigot doing something really bad, being called on it, and actually changing his tune for the better, or Grant might just never have been that kind of bigot and just made a terrible mistake, because as a president, Grant was probably the best friends the Jews had ever had in America up until that point. He appointed more Jews to high position than practically anyone else. He put protections in place for Jews like nobody's business, and he was fighting anti-Jewish discrimination and violence just as much as he was fighting anti-black from the KKK and similar other organizations. However, this day's historical headlines: Grant hates the Jews and kicks them out of his army. 17th of December. I will be back tomorrow with another historical headline. Until then, I have been the Sage, and I wish you all a very happy day.